The man in room 407, the rain was relentless, drumming against the windows of the taxi as Daniel sat in the back seat, exhausted from his business trip. It was past midnight when he finally arrived at the old hotel on the outskirts of the city. The place wasn't luxurious, but it was cheap, and for one night, that was enough. The hotel lobby was almost deserted, though the receptionist, a tired-looking old man, barely glanced at him as he checked in. The man handed Daniel his key and mumbled, "Room 406, elevators down, take the stairs." Daniel nodded, grabbed his suitcase, and headed towards the dimly lit stairwell. The hotel had an eerie silence, the kind that made every footstep sound louder than it should. He climbed the stairs, passing old, faded wallpaper and doors with worn-out numbers. The air smelled musty, like old carpet and forgotten places. When he reached the 4th floor, something felt off. The hallway was too quiet, too still. The lights overhead flickered slightly, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. He found his room 406, but just as he was about to insert the key, his eyes drifted to the door across the hall. Room 407. Unlike the other rooms, this door had something strange about it. The number on the plaque was slightly crooked, and the paint on the door looked newer than the rest of the hallway, as if it had been repainted recently. But what truly caught his attention was the chain lock, dangling loose, as if someone had forgotten to secure it. For a brief moment, he thought he heard something, a faint rustling sound, like movement inside, but it was so soft he couldn't be sure if he had imagined it. Shrugging off the unease, he unlocked his own door and stepped inside. The room was basically a bed, a desk, an old television. He threw his suitcase on the floor and collapsed onto the mattress. The exhaustion from the trip was weighing down on him, and all he wanted was sleep. But just as he was drifting off, he heard it again. A sound, a slow, deliberate shuffling from the hallway. Daniel frowned and sat up. The sound wasn't coming from outside his door, though it was coming from room 407. He walked over to the peephole and hesitated before looking through it. The hallway was dim, but he could see the door of room 407. It was still slightly open, just as he had seen earlier. Then, something moved, a shadow, just beyond the doorway. Someone was in there. He backed away, his heart pounding. It wasn't his business. If someone had broken in, or if there was a guest behaving strangely, it wasn't his problem. He tried to ignore it, but a few minutes later, there was a sound, a soft knock on his door. Knock, slow. Even though he froze. It wasn't a normal knock. It wasn't hurried or impatient, or the way a person would knock if they needed something. It was deliberate, methodical. He didn't answer. The knocking stopped. He exhaled, trying to convince himself it was just his imagination. Maybe someone knocked on the wrong door. Maybe he was too tired and was overthinking everything. But then, his phone buzzed. A text message. It was from an unknown number. It read, "Why didn't you open the door?" A cold chill ran down his spine. He stared at the screen, unable to move. His pulse was racing now. His hands felt clammy. He wanted to believe it was some kind of prank. But how would anyone know he had ignored the knock? Then another message. "I'm still here." A sound came from the peephole. A soft, wet breathing. Daniel's stomach twisted in horror. Someone was standing right outside his door, breathing against the peephole. Slowly, carefully, he crept toward the door, pressing his ear against it. Silence. Then, in the quiet, something slipped under the door. A piece of paper. He didn't want to pick it up. Every nerve in his body screamed at him not to. But his shaking hands reached down anyway. On the paper, scrawled in uneven, jagged letters, was a message. "Room 407 is not empty." Daniel dropped the note as if it had burned him. He backed away from the door, his breath ragged. Then, the television in his room turned on by itself. The static filled the air, an eerie, distorted hum. The old screen flickered, and for a second, just a second, he thought he saw a shape standing in the reflection. A human shape. Then the power went out. The entire room was plunged into darkness. Daniel fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking as he turned on the flashlight. The room was empty, but he could feel something watching him. Then dashed footsteps from inside room 407. Slow, measured, getting closer to his wall. Then his door handle started turning. Not knocking, not banging, just Turning testing if it was locked out, he ran to the door and pressed his weight against it, gripping the handle with all his strength. The turning stopped. A long silence followed. Then, a whisper, "You shouldn't have looked." A loud bang came from inside room 407. Something slammed against the wall so hard that Daniel felt the vibrations through his own room, then silence. For what felt like hours. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He just listened. Eventually, the first hint of dawn crept through the curtains. The hotel was silent again. He gathered his things, forcing himself to move down as soon as the sun was up. He left the room, barely daring to glance at room 407. The door was closed now, no sign that anything had happened out at the front desk. He hesitated before asking, "The room across from mine, 407, who's staying there?" The receptionist looked up, puzzled. 407? Daniel nodded. The man frowned, flipping through his records. "Sir, there is no room 407 in this hotel." Daniel felt his entire body go cold. "But I saw it," he stammered. The receptionist shook his head. "No, sir. The rooms on your floor skip from 406 to 408. There is no room 407. There never has been." Daniel turned and looked back towards the hallway. The door that had been there just hours ago was gone. Only a blank wall remained where room 407 had been.